very, very stressful times when there's background noise. So the sound of an air conditioning, a car passing by, a helicopter or an aeroplane going overhead, all of these things can be incredibly distracting to children. So as I've put up there, sort of a fly buzzing past the window or something can draw the attention of a child or even adults with autism. So hypersensitivity to various stimuli are one of the most, it's reported, one of the most distressing things for people with autism. They have routines and can feel lost as if the routine is changed, so routines are very important. Hypersensitivity to touch, to light, and as I've said, they can take language literally and have profound difficulties in language impairment. Often, some people suggest that autism really means thinking in pictures. It's a different way of thinking. It's a different way the brain is structured, and certainly a different way of brain functioning. So some people couch autism as a neurodifference, or rather than a deficit, just a difference. So a different way of thinking, and some have counted autism as thinking in pictures, which I think is a nice way of describing thoughts. And we know a proportion of people do actually think in this way, as opposed to an internal verbal dialogue, which is traditionally associated with reasoning. The prevalence of autism went from about 1 in 2,500 to about 1 in 1,000, and now we're seeing it in some reports about 1 in 100 even. But we do know that it's increased over the past decade. So autism is now more common than childhood cancer, Down syndrome, spina bifida, or cystic fibrosis. And we do know that boys are affected 4 times as often as girls, but it's really unknown as to why. Now, there is the argument that it's not the rates of actual autism that are increasing, rather the way we're picking it up. We're more aware of what autism is today, and clinicians and GPs, general practitioners or medical doctors, are now receiving training on autism. So just generally, people are picking up on the symptoms, whereas in the past, it may have gone undiagnosed. Well, I tend to characterize this as either missed diagnosis or sometimes misdiagnosis. So autism can be incorrectly diagnosed as something else or completely missed as well. And about 1 out of 68 families will have a child with autism, is thought. Now, whatever paper you read on the prevalence of autism, you always get a different response rate. But we do know that the prevalence, or the rates of which autism exists in the community, are increasing at a rapid rate. So communities are really cluing themselves up, and governments are making provision for autism and the care of people with the disabling symptoms of autism. So there's just a general chart pulled from the literature that shows the increase in autism over the last 15 years or so. What we're seeing is a rapid increase, and the blue dots there represent different research studies. So across research studies, we're seeing a general rise in the rates of autism. Now, science is really still baffled over the causes or the etiology of autism. We do know it's on the rise. Now, is there a genetic reason for this? Well, we do know there's a genetic origin to the vast proportion of cases of autism there. But one of the things that is interesting about autism is there isn't a blood test you can give for it. There isn't a DNA or a genetic test you can give. The diagnosis is given purely on a behavioural basis. And that means that somewhere along the line, there has to be a criteria or a cut-off for what constitutes autism and what does not. And within a lot of psychiatric conditions, we see this is the case, and it's often a good argument against there being discrete or separable classifications for a lot of the psychiatric or even medical conditions there. And the criteria, or the checklist of symptoms that you have to get a diagnosis of autism or Asperger's, is changing over successive editions of this manual that I spoke about earlier on, the DSM, or Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders there. But currently, the estimates of the instances of autism vary widely, and it depends on the literature you read. So bear in mind that when somebody tells you that 1 in 100 children have autism, that really you could introduce them to a different set of literature which says no, it's 1 in 500 or 1 in 250, or even that these aren't valid or reliable ways of characterizing what some people might understand as autism. So I want you to think of autism or entertain the notion that autism is different things to different people, and that even the clinician's criteria for what autism is changing over the years that our understanding of what it is come to fruition. So we're finding out more and more about it through research. Autism isn't a modern problem, even though, I'll give you a quote here from Uta Thrift, who's one of the key people behind the early descriptions of autism. Autism is not a modern problem, even though it has only been recognized in modern times. In view of the short history of psychiatry, and even the shorter history of child psychiatry, we know that the disorder recently described is not necessarily a recent disorder. An increase in diagnosed cases does not necessarily mean an increase in cases. So even though we're detecting it, it might not mean that autism at its core is increasing whatsoever. So bear that in mind when people tell you that autism is on the rise, or there's an epidemic of autism. Now, that might not be core autism, or whatever the causal consequences of or reasons for autism cropping up are. It might be that we're just detecting it. Just going to spend the final few minutes here talking about some really quite important things. How autism was first diagnosed. The people you see up on the screen there, Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger's, independently, supposedly, came up with clinical descriptions of what autism and Asperger's is there. They were working in completely different environments there. So after the Second World War, when the world really was going through a lot of changes, they came up with descriptions of autism. And later on, we came to formally see these as what we now know as autistic disorder or autism. So in 1943, Kanner described it, and a little bit later on, Asperger's described it. Asperger's was German,